Welcome everyone to the webinar that we do the first Wednesday of each month. With us is Sandy Harding, who has a few questions about sulforaphane for Chris Neville.
Well, good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, everybody, wherever you may be dialing in from around the world. And it's always a great pleasure to share a monthly update call with you. And this week, in fact, we've got a very special guest all the way from Australia. Well, not so far from me, really. But a fellow, in fact, a Kiwi living in Australia is Sandy Harding. And Sandy called me a couple of weeks ago just making an inquiry about some of the ingredients in our Calibrate product. And it actually sparked a conversation. And we just thought, wouldn't it be great if we just shared some of those thoughts or ideas with other brand promoters? So lo and behold, that's what we've got this week. So Sandy Harding, welcome, and I appreciate you joining us on the call.
Thanks for that, Chris. Much appreciated. And I think once the questions are asked, then other people are going to be relieved as well. So that question that I asked Chris a couple of weeks ago was, Chris, how much sulforaphane am I getting in every single scoop of Calibrate that I take? And then the mystery unfolded. So, Chris, take it away.
Well, it's a great question. I think one of the things that triggered me some years ago was understanding some of the research behind sulforaphane. And for those of you who are brand new, sulforaphane has been researched at Johns Hopkins universities back in the 90s and has been now widely researched around the world. In fact, there's over 1,000 white papers that have currently espousing the wonders of sulforaphane. And some people say, well, where do I get sulforaphane? And the first thing that I wanted to clarify for Sandy was there is no sulforaphane in Calibrate. And it's like, oh, that's terrible. Well, it's actually not. Sulforaphane is formed by combining a couple of compounds. And I just want to sort of back it up a little bit because sulforaphane is actually receiving a lot of exposure simply because it has an ability to unlock or reset the genes in a particular way that help the cell defend itself from unwanted toxins and oxidative stress. So this slide here explains a little bit about how sulforaphane works. Now, if it's a new word, don't glaze over just yet, please. It's actually, there's cruciferous vegetables. You know the wonders of broccoli that about growing up and certainly from cabbage and other cruciferous vegetables. But the sulforaphane that we're talking about is the ability for glucoraphanin, which is a compound within those vegetables, to combine with an enzyme called myrosinase, and that forms sulforaphane. And the reason why sulforaphane is so important from a clinical research perspective is that it actually switches on the genes that are responsible for, as you'll see here, switching on the DNA in each of our cells to produce a range of antioxidant compounds. And it also switches on the DNA in each of our cells to produce a range of detoxification enzymes. And sulforaphane has actually been researched. There's now over 500 different genes that have actually that are actually upregulated or downregulated, switched on or switched off, that can actually support the cell maintaining balance. And it's the most powerful natural compound with that effect. And so when Sandy asked me specifically how much sulforaphane is in a scoop of Calibrate, it's not quite such an easy answer because there is no ingredient sulforaphane. So if you see on a label sulforaphane, there is no ingredient sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is formed, as you'll see here, glucoraphanin. Crazy word. That's an inactive precursor that needs to have myrosinase as the enzyme, the red arrow, and that's converted to sulforaphane, and that's the active compound. And the reason why it's important is because it's very unstable, and it's formed, and it's utilized by the body, and then it's inactive or expelled. So there's 20 to 50 times more glucoraphanin in sprouts than broccoli. So eating your broccoli may have been something that we heard about that's beneficial, and that's true, but the broccoli sprout actually has 20 to 50 times more of this glucoraphamin, which combines with the myrosinase to form the sulforaphane, which is what all the wondrous research is occurring right now. Now, part of the reason why that's so important is that when you think of how do I get sulforaphane into my diet, well, you can eat more sprouts. The vegetable would be a great start on a regular basis, but the sprout being 20 to 50 times more concentrated is probably an easy way to go, again, even more so because of the density. But that's not really going to be practical for most people because they've got to get up and pull the sprouts, and it's not really a lifestyle friendly. Yes, it's great if you can do it, but we needed to find other ways that really introduce convenience into our modern lifestyle. Part of the reason why sulforaphane is hot on a global scale for anti-cancer research and much of the other research is that it activates or induces quinone reductase. Now that's comparable to when there's a high level of it active, there is low incidence of cancer. When there's low level activity, there's high incidence of cancer. So it's more in the chemoprotective research area. And if you look at chlorophylls and vitamin B12s, etc., in terms of their ability to activate this mechanism, sulforaphane is way off the charts with regard to its ability to upregulate this phase 2 enzyme activity. And if it was only that, it would be exciting, but it's actually the fact that sulforaphane is multifunctional, and that's really where the key lies. One of the research that's been highly prized, and in fact it's ongoing, but it goes back even to 2009, and some of the published studies was when they had the studies in Japan with Helicobacter pylori, which is actually a stomach bug. And this particular bacteria can lead to ulceration and ultimately to stomach cancers. And so by being able to reduce this particular bacteria, it actually improves the outcomes for a lot of people. And in Japan, it's prolific. And so this study was really quite a major breakthrough because it showed that sulforaphane reduced the Helicobacter bacteria, which then leads to less gastric reflux, that's a mouthful, less risk of stomach ulcers and less risk of stomach cancer. So this is all interesting as far as trying to mitigate some of the challenges, but it went through so many different iterations of research that it's been taken up by many other institutions and universities around the world, looking at what it is about sulforaphane specifically, and they tagged into a whole range of different areas of published findings. So it promotes rapid detoxification of toxins of all kinds before they can harm the human cell. So realistically, when we talk about flipping that switch and having these detoxification enzymes, you'll see in some other presentations we talk about primary antioxidant activity. I'm not going to get too crazy here, but there's really, you can just think of it as antioxidants that come into the body that we typically get from our foods are beneficial, but the body also makes its own. And what's the excitement about is that this can help upregulate the body to make more of its own antioxidants and also detoxification enzymes. And so if the body is making more of its own, it's becoming more efficient at a cellular level. But more importantly, what it's doing is it's active where it needs to be active, where the toxins exist, and that's within the cell. And so if you're able to eliminate toxicity before it can take hold and do damage, that's a very, very important tool, you know, in getting well and staying well. Improving cholesterol metabolism. As it says there, it also has got a range of other benefits in terms of the chemoprotective. The part down the bottom here is that sulforaphane is a phytochemical that displays both anti-carcinogenic and anti-cancer activity. Sulforaphane modulates many cancer-related events, including susceptibility to cancers, cell death, cell cycle, angiogenesis. So when I talked about multifunctional sulforaphane, we weren't kidding, because if all it did was it assisted with glutathione synthesis. Everybody that's been at least mindful of their health in the last 10 years would have heard a lot more about glutathione and the importance as a master antioxidant in the body, and it's true. But it also works together with superoxide dismutase and catalase, and so being able to have the body utilize glutathione more efficiently is an ideal situation. So you can see here where it says detox enzymes, it's upregulating that. It also inhibits the inflammation markers as well. And so you're going to see the ability for it to recycle coenzyme Q10 and many other things that we would consider in and of themselves a really exciting piece of research or innovation. And there's now 1,000 different papers. So the ability for sulforaphane to help the body detoxify is critically important, because we know that oxidative stress from toxins and metabolic waste is really the fundamental foundation to inflammation, which can lead to chronic inflammation and ultimately a range of other challenges that would be further downstream as well. So what we have is a range of different research that has been showing some of the properties of sulforaphane in its ability to help the cell and help the body become more efficient. And so this is really just about looking at the different mechanisms. We're not talking about treatment here, because our product is not designed to treat disease. And we need to be very, very mindful about what we state as being claims. This is a presentation on the information on the clinical research, not on our product and its ability to treat. Let's be clear with that part. Right, but the research is compelling. And you'll see here, even with the research on Parkinson's, where quinone reductase, remember that what I mentioned a little earlier, phase 2 detoxification enzymes protects the cells, and sulforaphane is potentially protective against loss of, a big word again, forget about it, neurons. So let's just look at the fact that we have all of these different mechanisms, but we just need to look at one thing, and that is, irrespective of what the condition is inflammation part of that mechanism? If inflammation is part of the mechanism, if it's part of the skeletal system, we may call it arthritis or osteoporosis. If it's inflammation of the cardiovascular system, well, we may call that heart disease. If it's inflammation of the respiratory system, well, we may call that, bronchitis or asthma. So it's inflammation, and inflammation is really that mechanism of the body has too little or too much. And we're talking about too much in terms of toxicity. So sulforaphane has become a real hero in the exploration of active compounds that are in foods today that can help the body function more optimally. And that's why we look at, irrespective of the condition, it's really about the mechanism of too little or too much. And this is the idea of primary antioxidants that the body makes are millions of times more effective than anything you can get from your diet. The phytochemicals and the chemoprotective, you see here, a study of 628 men diagnosed with prostate cancer found that increasing cruciferous vegetable intake from 1 to 3 or more servings per week resulted in a 41% decrease in apparent risk. So that's pretty extraordinary. Let me just open that back up there again. And so what we have here is that if we look at how sulforaphane talks to our cancer genes, really there's 5 different stages here that could be looked at, and we're not going to talk about this from a clinical level. We're just talking about it from a research level as health curious creatures that we are as brand promoters. And so what it has are the different phases here of the initiation, promotion, and inhibits the movement from primary tumors to invasive cells that can metastasize and move throughout the body. And some of the research is showing that it actually inhibits and blocks some of the progression from a normal cell to initiated cells to neoplastic cells right the way through. So this is why the research is so compelling, because it's showing that there's a mechanism of action that sulforaphane can help the body with, and that's why it becomes such an important reason to include it in our diets today. And when you look at glucoraphanin in sprouts versus the vegetables, you can see that 10 grams of fresh sprouts equals about 200 grams of mature broccoli. So we're just saying quite simply that one serve of Calibrate per day, one scoop, is going to be sufficient to achieving those results that you can achieve with vegetables. That doesn't mean that you don't have a healthy diet. Of course not. But what it does is it means that at least you're getting some nutrients into the body that can support the body's ability to produce more of its own primary antioxidants and and also detoxification enzymes. So on that note, Sandy, I hope I haven't had anybody glaze over too much. But if we can just come back to it, that was just sort of a bit of an update on some of the findings there, at least.
Yeah, look, to me it just makes sense, because I am convinced that most people are walking around with inflammation somewhere in their body, and so therefore taking Calibrate is obviously a fantastic solution. The thing that really that I'd like you to explain, if you've got a few seconds, Chris, is the mirazinase. Now, I believe mirazinase is in our gut, but what if it's not?
That's a great question. That's a great question there. So when people think of, I've got to have additional cruciferous vegetables in my diet, would say that's a great idea. And the reason being, obviously, because of it has a compound called glucoraphanin in the vegetables. Mm-hmm. But that mirazinase enzyme that is typically in a healthy gut is necessary to convert the compound that's in the vegetable to sulforaphane, which is the bioactive compound that does all of those things called switching on, switching off, etc. So if you don't have mirazinase in your gut because you're not well, then you are not converting any glucoraphanin from the vegetables into sulforaphane, period. And so when you have a product that contains the broccoli, you'll see here broccoli seeds, broccoli sprouts, and broccoli vegetables. There's the different stages of obviously the actual vegetable itself, and that is the broccoli seeds, as we see here, 20 to 50 times more glucoraphanin than the mature vegetable. So the reason why our product, we had to include a process that ensured that the enzyme mirazinase remained active, and what we call enzyme active. And because by having a scoop, if you're unwell, you're needing that enzyme to be active, so that way when it's wet and you're drinking it, it actually converts that glucoraphanin to the sulforaphane. That's why it's so critically important as a process. Most companies don't even refer to that. They're just accepting the fact that the gut typically has some mirazinase, with some being capital S, some mirazinase, but they're anticipating that there is sufficient mirazinase in your gut to convert the glucoraphanin to what they call sulforaphane, or what they refer to as sulforaphane yield. We're not taking that gamble. We're just ensuring that there's at least additional mirazinase in the product as an enzyme active form of the ingredient. That's all. And so that additional step ensures everybody has the ability to enjoy the benefit of sulforaphane, particularly if you're not well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Chris, that just sort of speaks volumes to me, because we see in Australia, and you'd be aware of it, a lot of companies promoting the sulforaphane, and nothing's spoken about mirazinase. And I go, what's going on. And this is all sparked because I am health curious, as you said, and I'm tired of the I guess the overwhelm, and looking for solutions, and having to do a huge amount of research to find out which companies are actually being open and walking with integrity with what they're saying, and you find them out on the shelf, and people don't know all the ins and outs of it. So this, what you're saying now, just makes so much sense, and I'm sure that other brand promoters, you know, will love what you're saying and be able to work with Calibrate a lot more now that, you know, we understand so much more about it, you know, for those that are health curious, as you say.
Yeah, look, it's a great point, Sandy, and I think, you know, one of the other things is that people have been encouraged to read labels and would say, yes, great stuff. But, you know, it's a rabbit hole, and there's a lot of, there's a lot to consider for somebody who's not skilled in what to look for. It's like, you know, I'm a mum or a dad and I got a busy life, and you know, that's not my gig, and that's fair enough. So what we do is we try to take the guesswork out of it, and we, you know, apart from myself, working with some other clinicians that are skilled in different areas, and what we're looking at is, wouldn't it be great if we can just put truth in the bottle, or put truth in the tub? And that's really what we're wanting to achieve is not just the sulforaphane from that's formed from the broccoli, is that the fact that there are certain other ingredients that can support, as let's say the crew or the support. And one of those is actually selenium. Now, we know that we can get selenium in our diets, but with depleted soils around the planet, and some foods grown in these depleted soils, there is depleted selenium that shows up in our food chain. And when you include just a small amount of selenium within the formulation, what it allows is up to 300% more sulforaphane to become available in the body. Just a simple thing like that. And so understanding the subtlety of it, rather than getting tied up in this lab newsworthiness of sulforaphane, and where a lot of smoke and mirrors comes, because vendors are in business to sell ingredients. But unless you know what a bioactive ingredient could look like, should look like, then what you've got is something that's, it looks good on a label, but the body can't utilize it so well. So it's not what we take in, it's what we can actually absorb and utilize, isn't it, really, at the end of the day?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Well, blow me away again, this conversation. But look, thanks, Chris, for that. It's just, yeah, thanks for taking the time to do the presentation. It's just amazing, just absolutely amazing.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks for you for posing the question. I don't want it to be too crazy, but the reality is that, you know, you could look at each ingredient that represents something that we think was, oh, goji berries became the rage and the acai berry became the rage. And it's like, just because it's on the label, how much of it is actually in the product? And really, what is it that's the active compound in there that's beneficial? And it's a bit like saying, you know, you've got one grain of salt to do something, and you go, well, it's not really going to help too much. And so we have to look at the bang for the buck, and being able to have enough of something that can support the body becoming more efficient. And this is really what we're looking at with the broccoli sprout powder, combined with the selenium, but also combined, as we mentioned, with the C3 turmeric as well, with the curcuminoids, and then of course the melon extract as well, because we're targeted it to support the body in its primary antioxidant and detoxification pathways. If we can upregulate that, then it's going to be millions of times. You can't consume enough oranges, apples, or otherwise to try to get certain types of vitamins in the body that act as antioxidants to do that as what you could by helping your body become more efficient at a cellular level by upregulating that process itself, that primary antioxidant production. And that's really why we're talking about focusing from the inside out rather than the outside in. And that's where the shift is, and we believe. So on that note, I think we'd just like to maybe wrap it up there. Do you have any other final comments you'd like to share or thoughts there, Sandy?
Look, I think you've given more than I actually initially asked for. You've given, a couple of good lessons all in one. So thanks ever so much for that, Chris. I so appreciate it. It makes it a lot more understandable for me. Thank you.
No worries. And look, take into consideration, there are some fabulous companies out there doing some really incredible things, and in the sulforaphane space as well. But it's just one of those things to look at. It's ensure that it's enzyme active, but it's not in and of itself. All we're focusing on, it's then going beyond that to look at the other companion ingredients in the formulation that activate and upregulate that the cell's ability to produce its own defense enzymes, and that's really part of the exciting background to the calibrated cell. So on that note, I'd like to say thanks very much for everybody for tuning in. Hope it's been a little bit insightful, if nothing else, and onwards and upwards. Have a great week. Have a great month. Talk soon. Thank you.